All right. Yeah. Seems like we're good to go. Hi, everyone. How are you doing? Guys been enjoying the class so far? Not sure we've learned a lot. Any particular topics around commercialization that you guys might be looking for a little bit more insights or questions about that I can make sure to address through a presentation?
How do you get your suppliers?
Okay. Is it through suppliers?
That's what we're maybe with the parts of government.
Okay.
You either sell to them or help them help us like implement this design.
Okay. Cool. Well, this is a relatively new slide deck. I've never used it before, so I'll probably be rambling. Feel free to stop, raise your hand. Stop me at any time, raise your hand, ask questions. And I do have a hard stop at 1:40 that I have to jump on a call. So I'm going to leave some cards here. You guys are always welcome to shoot me an email or give me a call. And you can also, if all the cards get taken up, which I don't believe will be the case, you can always find me on the TDC's website. So thanks for being here. It's a pleasure being here myself. I did this presentation, I think, the last 2 years, and it's always really fun with the classroom being engaging. But I figured this year I'd talk to you guys a little bit about approaches to commercialization. First, kind of highlight what the TDC does and their approach to commercialization, and then some of my own insights and thoughts about the whole startup world and investment world and why it's a really unique time to pursue the ideas that you're working on and potentially argue that we are in the age of the entrepreneur. So the TDC is the university's tech transfer office. You can find a tech transfer office pretty much at any major research university around the country. We're tasked with managing the intellectual assets that are developed here through the research that faculty are doing. It actually doesn't only have to be faculty and funded research. We also serve staff, so we work with folks like the maintenance department, and anytime somebody calls and says, hey, I have a problem with the building, they come out and they fix it. So we're working with them on some innovative approaches to manage that workflow for their staff, make sure that a lot of knowledge about the building isn't being lost and so forth. We also have stuff coming out of the School of Music, some video game-like music lessons in order to encourage students to study. And really, I mean, I've had somebody come to us with just a cell phone case with a scale on it in order to measure the weight of the food for better dietary results in comparison to just calculating calories and so forth. Let's see, space. There we go. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it. I don't think that there's one perfect way or only way to commercialization, whether you're in a university or working for a venture capital firm, or if you're in the later stages of investments into startups and companies. There's a lot of different ways to go about it, and at our office we're always constantly working to refine our tools and processes, and learning from other universities around the country. And then also just following trends and figuring out what are the best tools in order to be successful at commercializing technologies. Our office receives roughly about 200 new technologies each year, and we put it through a process where we evaluate multiple components of the technology. The image in the front, or in the middle on the top, is somewhat something you can find on most tech transfer offices. About this life line and flow of work that happens. So, in addition to the 200, those 200 disclosures are derived from $400 million in research annually here at the university, which continues to grow year over year. And our office, the university started our office in 1970, where we were initially just really a classical licensing office. So a faculty member would come, that was a great idea. The licensing manager would simply work with an attorney to file a patent, and they pretty much would just wait until somebody came knocking. About 10 years ago, the university did a study and realized that a lot of impact on the state and getting the research into the marketplace to benefit folks happens through startups. So they did a big push on the startup and entrepreneurial front. And over the last 10 years, we've spun out about 150 companies. About 40% and change are still with their doors open. And there's a lot of great things coming out of the university over that period of time, as I'm sure many of you are aware. Pixar essentially came out of this building before this building probably existed. And we have BioFire up in Research Park, which has been around probably since the 90s and is close to $1 billion company. AREP, Myriad Genetics, BlackRock Microsystems, which uses the electrode array to do implants on amputees and pain and so forth. So a lot of great things happening here at the university, and there's a lot of resources for students and faculty as well, which I'll go over in a little bit. But the reason I wanted to start with this slide is just get along the message that there's no one way of doing it. And you guys are going to run into a lot of people who are going to tell you no with your endeavors, and I would encourage you not to give up and constantly try to improve. And one example is even our own office. We got a new director at the beginning of the year, and despite a couple of really nice accolades in the last year that have come in, one naming the university as #1 in tech commercialization through the Milken Institute, but also being recognized by Nature or a subsidiary of Nature magazine in the sense that we are, the university as a whole is a top place for tech transfer and innovation. Despite that, we're not just sitting relaxed and keep doing what we're doing. We're refining our processes. We're actually going around campus and interviewing who we consider our customer, which is the faculty member, and figuring out what we can do better, what they would like to see happen. Because with so many folks at the university, a lot of people need just different help in different places. Professor Natan, for example, very entrepreneurial, works a lot with our office, has had a number of companies of his own, but sometimes you do get folks that have just been in academia for 20 years, and only now they've really come upon a great innovation or just motivated because they've received tenure to kind of shift some of their focus and try something new and challenging. Because personally, I think entrepreneurship and startups are one of the hardest things that you can do, and it takes some time to get things rolling. So it certainly takes a lot of effort up front, and keep working and striving at the projects that you guys are doing. And to kind of prove that there's no one way of going about doing stuff, I figured I'd pull up some examples, and the list could probably go on forever of great opportunities that people, very experienced, very knowledgeable, just didn't really believe in it and ended up passing on it. So CEO or former CEO, I don't know what his specific role is right now, but founder of Starbucks, went around and talked to a lot of different banks to try and get funding, and I would say about 80%, if I'm just eyeballing that number, told no. In addition, while I was looking for some of these facts, I actually found that Howard Schwartz approached Shaquille O'Neal at some point and asked him to go into business with him in order to get a lot of the Starbucks establishments into the African American communities in the country. And Shaq himself said, African Americans don't drink coffee, and this doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Howard ended up going with Magic Johnson, and Magic Johnson ended up making $70 million on that deal. So again, two great basketball players, different philosophies, different beliefs, worked out well for a few folks in there. And today, I believe Starbucks is valued at $80 billion. So probably was a good opportunity back in the day for some folks that just didn't quite get it. In addition, we have Airbnb. I'm guessing everybody knows what Airbnb today is. But looking at that fundraise that they wanted to do for $150,000, today it is a $30 billion company. So if anybody invested 10%, they basically have $3 billion today. I don't have $150,000 laying around, so not everybody is in the position to make these investments. But in general, if you are a professional investor or working for some folks, you never know what things are going to develop into. And what I really liked is just in this article that you guys can find, and you guys can get the slide deck. Those links will take you to the articles. 5 of the investors did respond, some in various ways, and 2 just ignored it completely. You guys know Blockbuster? I think the last standing franchise was on the corner of 21st South and 7th East until not too long ago. Netflix, I couldn't find the term, but apparently Netflix approached them and offered them to invest heavily in the company and take a big chunk of it, and Blockbuster didn't see them as a threat at the time. And then Nolan Bushnell, he actually is the inventor of Atari, one of the first video gaming systems that were ever created, and the inventor of, he created Chuck E. Cheese. Actually gave Steve Jobs one of his first jobs, if not the first job in his entity at the time. And Steve Jobs approached Nolan, who's 74 today and still active in the startup world, and said, hey, I'll give you a third of the company for $50,000. Apple is $700 billion today. And Nolan is not the only person to say no. There's a lot of quotes from like famous CEOs from Intel and IBM that all touched on the fact that why would anybody need a personal computer in their household? This is crazy. So you just don't know what you don't know. And then something that I think more people can relate with is, and they actually come here every year and have invested in companies like PowerPod and I think a few others that have spun out of the university for student projects. But I just found this article about them not investing in a deal, and the company still took off. I've heard of Coffee Meets Bagels, didn't know too much about it, but somebody in the last year who's had their house broken into, I recently was looking for security cameras, and this is one of the top of the line, won the CES award for most innovative product or something like that in 2016, 2017, and I didn't end up buying that product, but it's certainly taking off and presents a great, shows that even the best experts in the world don't always get it right. Okay. And then, growing up, I was always afraid to fail. So my parents would yell at me for getting a C or a D or something like that. But many great entrepreneurs, and I just again grabbed a lot of different quotes, speak to the fact that failure is healthy. You're not going to always get it right. This is in the previous slide we kind of talked about a lot of people getting it wrong, but especially earlier on in your careers, as you guys are facing this monumental task of getting technologies to market, building startups, building teams, getting in touch with government, with suppliers, how do you do this, how do you do that? Many people just don't know. They just go about it, and they figure it out, and they get it wrong. And the most important thing is to learn from those lessons. But all in all, I mean, you have Henry Ford and just these great names that have done a lot of great things for the United States and for the planet in general. And I would just encourage you guys to keep working hard. And when you are faced with the daunting task and the unknown, it just doesn't hurt to try or ask folks around you of how you can go about it. So jumping back to this slide real quick, the only reason I wanted to bring it up is because I'm going to kind of jump into what we do at the TVC and how we go about our process. Keeping in mind that our process is constantly being refined this year, and we're about 3 months away from just concluding our overhaul of our operations, as we're just trying to figure out, again, what works, what doesn't, and start some new programs in order to offer our customers here at the university, aka the faculty and staff, more services in order to encourage them to get work with our office, disclose more technologies, and ultimately the state, as a public university, wants us to generate impact and jobs and so forth. And there's all kinds of different metrics that we're evaluated on. But yeah, so a couple years ago, somebody came in here, and this was the initial slide that I built off of, and this was our process. And went all over the place. We had a 3-stage process, all focused around engines, and just got really complicated for a lot of people who didn't quite know what and when you're in the 2-stroke phase, when you're in the 4-cylinder, what's a V8? Are we talking about startups, or are we talking about cars? What's happening here? And there was a lot of value here, but yeah, we went around, we talked to our customers, we showed them this slide. They said, you guys are crazy, probably paraphrasing right there, but they just said it's very, it's challenging to understand exactly where we are in the process, what we do in each process. You guys have these acronyms, names change. As a side note, about 5 years ago, EDC was called the TCO, Technology and Commercialization Office. Before that, it was the TTO. So folks who have been here for a decade still getting confused. So messaging and clarity around the services was something that we found out that we need to do a better job at, which is one of the reasons why our office is working to improve on that front. So I don't have any fancy graphs or anything about what we do today. We look at three major pillars. We look at the usefulness of the technology. Why is anybody going to care about this? Why will the market adopt it? We look at the market and the market size and who's in that industry and just try and figure out, is this a worthwhile opportunity not only for our hard dollars that go into IP protection, but all the time that folks are spending in our office on each opportunity. From those 200 disclosures a year, we actually have an active portfolio of 1,300 different research projects. So we really have to pick and choose, especially as industries and markets change pretty quickly, which projects we're going to work on. And at the same time, especially nowadays in the outside industry world, they really want to see technologies advance, and ideas and concepts aren't really that valuable anymore. You'll oftentimes find, and I'll show you some statistics later in the slide deck, what investors look for in companies and the opportunities that they're investing in. And I'll just start with, it's usually not the technology. Sometimes it is the market, but not all the time. But they really look at the teams. So when we do our evaluation, it's about a 10-week process right out the gates, where it's more of a sniff test for us. I think about 60 to 65% of our technologies kind of get through that first sniff test. In an academic institution, usually these technologies are pretty early in their development life cycle, and on average, it takes about 8 years for them to start generating cash for the university, or a return for that matter. So if we find the technology to be useful and applicable to markets or one market, then we jump into the market. And if that market is big enough that it's worthwhile putting investment towards it, then we evaluate the IP and we try and figure out, hey, can we protect this invention? And if all those three things look good, then we start taking a little bit closer look at the team. Usually here at the university, we have a healthy environment of collaboration. So you'll have clinicians up at the hospital working on patients and talking to the engineers in the bioengineering building that need a certain catheter or sensor or imaging tool in order to give better treatment to their patients. And it's just this great cycle that happens. Sometimes our teams are just one inventor, and he's really or she's really gung-ho about the innovation or the discovery that they've done. And no one person can really do it alone. There are rare circumstances, but nowadays in such complex industries and technologies, it usually requires a diverse team of individuals with a multitude of skill sets and experiences to really create a good, strong opportunity for getting the technology to market. At the same time, where is this technology? So if it's just in the concept phase, it's really hard to actually file for a patent or get a patent. You have to have some data and show that the technology works. And then at the same time, different folks have different funding streams and so forth. And if we know that there's no allocated funding towards the project, how are we going to advance it, de-risk it, and get it in front of people that might find it interesting? Any questions yet? All right. So I'm not the biggest fan of intellectual property. It's kind of funny because I work in it all day long. My personal belief, and I think there's some studies to back it, is that it is a little bit outdated. Patents started over 100 years ago. At times, things were slower, so 20 years kind of makes sense. But I think, personally, I think it's the cost of doing business with the big players in the game, and it stifles innovation at the end of the day. But in a capitalistic society, you do need to give people a competitive advantage and motivation in order to encourage them to create innovation. And there's always changes to the patent law, so I just wouldn't be surprised if at some point later down the road there's some kind of change, whether it's the amount of years. I may be completely wrong. I don't have any indicators from the market that this is happening anytime soon, but I get a lot of people that come to me, whether it's in my capacity here at the university or outside when I'm doing different projects and so forth. That for them the patent seems like the holy grail, and I'll touch on later down on these slides on the other considerations besides just a patent. I'm not saying that patents aren't valuable, and you certainly need to keep it in mind, and it just depends on the venture that you're going after and what you're going to be doing to determine if there is a strong justification and reason to invest in the expensive patent process. So there are different types of intellectual property. As you can see from the examples on this slide, some very common examples that are used is Coca-Cola. They probably could have filed for a patent back in the 20s on the composition, that recipe that makes that great bubbly flavor, but they realized that that would only give them protection for 20 years. And they said rather than tell the whole world about it, because essentially if you do create something novel, the government wants to give you a short-term monopoly of 20 years to commercialize it, or you can keep it as a trade secret and basically ensure that you have that forever. People can go and try and copy the recipe, and they'll probably have a hard time because Pepsi tastes like Pepsi and Coke tastes like Coke. And also, it's not just as simple as like keeping your mouth shut. There are certain processes and documents and employment contracts that you do sign, but I think in the world there's like 9 to 12 people who know the Coke official recipe. And actually, if you go overseas, or even if you just buy the glass bottle of Mexican Coke that it's often referred to, the flavor is different than other places. So I actually lived in Israel for 15 years, and they have their own Coca-Cola plant there, and it is completely different, more along the lines of the Mexican Coke, but overall, there are certain reasons why to keep trade secrets if you don't want people copying you, especially when the burden of enforcement of your own patent is on you, which we'll touch on soon. Trademarks are also very valuable.
Yeah. With trade secrets, let's say somebody did somehow could come up with a thing, they could patent it even though Coca-Cola's had that trade secret for that long.
As long as it's not published and in the open domain, I think so. That's a great question. I've never actually thought about it or asked. But I do think that if somebody figured it out and went and patented it, then they could probably get that insurance. Overall, trade secrets they're not out in the world. As soon as they get out in the world, outside of you would have somebody sign a confidentiality disclosure agreement or something of that nature, and as soon as it's out there, kind of like with patents, and we'll touch on this in a second, that's a public disclosure and you've lost your rights. So I'm pretty sure Coca-Cola is still considered a trade secret. So yeah, if nobody has ever talked about this concoction, you should be okay. But the challenge there is because we have so much history behind us that if you took a few tidbits from all over the place, it could potentially just kill the opportunity to patent, but we'll talk about that process in a second. So trademarks, also really great. Apple has the Apple symbol. Anywhere you look, you can just get it. Nike with the swoosh started years ago. My brain's just kind of like tailored to think about these things. You can also get trademarks and copyrights just on colors. The Snowbird Mountain Resort, the blue, is an officially registered color that nobody else can use. I'm not an expert on that as far as how do you prove the different color schemes and so forth, and if the human eye can't notice the differences, what does that mean? I'm not really sure. I was really surprised to hear that Snowbird cared so much about their blue. But I would assume Coca-Cola and McDonald's have their own protection of their own color because they've done a lot of studies, and red gets our appetite going, and we're really hungry, and so forth. Copyright is another form of creative arts. You can make a drawing, put your initials on the bottom. That's a piece of creative art. You have your date on it, and anybody afterwards tries to copy the exact same thing, in principle, you could go after them. Code, programming, and so forth. There's valuable code, and then there's a little bit weaker code that's somewhat easy to move around. So I wouldn't say that every single time you put down a letter or so, it's the next greatest thing. But copyrights are a great way to get protection. They actually last a lot longer than patents. So I think Disney World still has copyright protection on Mickey Mouse. So if anybody wants to use the Mickey Mouse figure, they will need to go to Disney and get a license agreement from them and be able to market it. And I mean, that's across the NFL. So like a year or two ago, actually, the Redskins lost their trademark, for example. So anybody now can go and make merchandise with Redskins symbols on it, and the Washington Redskins can't do anything about it. And it's because they didn't maintain the trademark that's appropriate through these processes. And though a lot of times people talk about patents, these other three versions of protection are great. I recently heard that the University of Florida makes $16 million a year from the Gatorade trademark that they license, I think, to Nike or Coca-Cola or somebody to advertise that. And it's certainly something that people should always be considering because it does bring value and brand recognition and just brings different types of protection.
So with patents, they last 20 years, but with trademarks, it's just a matter of you just have to renew it every so often, but it essentially goes on indefinitely if you keep up on it.
Yeah, trademarks go on indefinitely. You need to basically be in commerce, so your symbol or the thing that you trademark needs to be out there on like posters, and you need to, in theory, you can just be like a website, but you have to like actively be doing business in commerce with that symbol in order for it to hold true. And there's probably a few other situations, and yet some deadlines that can renew it that will last for a while. So the big one, patents. There's different types of patents. At the university, we primarily pursue utility patents. I've been here for about 4 years. I have not come across any cases that we filed design patents on. Could be that one of my colleagues has, but it doesn't really, it's nothing that we really look at. It's, the right opportunity, it brings the right value. So Apple actually got a design patent on the square shape of the cell phone. And for a number of years, them and Samsung were suing each other back and forth. Ultimately, Apple won. Samsung had to pay them $1 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, but Samsung probably makes tens of billions of dollars a quarter, so probably something they could live with. And also, just again, another reason why earlier I said personally I view it as just the cost of doing business for some of these big players. And nowadays, you'll actually go out and you'll find what's called patent pools, because companies don't want to sue each other, so they just throw in all of their IP. They're allowed to share keep to themselves some of their more valuable IP, but it's just a way for them to not sue each other because it doesn't do any good to anybody. You might have heard Tesla a number of years ago said, we will in good faith open up our patent portfolio to do anybody who wants to advance the electric vehicle market and use these technologies in good faith and so forth, and they won't sue them. And basically, by doing that, if anybody is using Tesla's patents or infringing on Tesla's patents, and Tesla unawarely is infringing on their patents, apparently strategically it gives them an advantage in that they can't be sued, though the person suing themselves infringing on the other person's patents. So, unique ways that people are trying to move away from just dealing with lawsuits and so forth, and I would just assume that the heads of these companies just have a massive division and that they deal with it, and it might come up in a board meeting at some point. But these guys, some of the big players have thousands of patent attorneys that work solely for them, and they're just patenting and in the legal world 24/7. We don't really do a lot of agricultural research here at the university. I would assume that we've pursued some plant patents, usually at some of the other universities in the state. You'll see a lot more of that activity. And in general, it just to get a patent on something, you just can't. One of the core principles is it can't be something that naturally occurs in the environment. It needs to be a new, unique phenomenon that we as humans kind of create. And then within utility patents, where we kind of do most of our pursuits, there's different kinds of utility patents. You have a device, you have compositions, you have methods. So like a method of manufacturing something. When looking at devices, it's just the device. It's not the device on a boat or on a plane. It's just the device just as a standalone thing. And to know if you are patent eligible, there's 3 main criteria that somebody needs to meet. So first and foremost, the biggest question that will always come up is, has there been a public disclosure? Back in, I think, 2011, the United States changed their approach and joined the rest of the world in what they call um, um, a first to file. So we're a first to file country now, where previously, if you had the invention written down in your notebook and you had a date there, that was enough to say, like, I was the first one to invent this, and therefore I have rights to this innovation, and not this other person that just coincidentally thought about it later and filed with you guys, with the U.S. Patent Office. So now whoever goes to the U.S. Patent Office first and files, they're essentially first in line. And if before you went and filed with the USPTO, you have a public disclosure, which mean various things. It can be just an abstract sometimes online. It can be you talking to your buddy at home. It can be, technically speaking, it could even be within the university, just amongst your peers and so forth. There's different stipulations. You just want to make sure that this individual or company is under confidentiality with you if you are sharing with them enabling elements of your invention. So if you've developed the greatest new way to manufacture something, and you don't tell them how it's being manufactured or what you're manufacturing or what that process is like, and you're just talking to them about, hey, I can improve the efficiency of your manufacturing by X% or by X time, that's not enabling. You're just kind of telling them the results. But if you told them, yeah, we have this plunger that moves up and down and it grabs onto this thing and moves it all around and so forth, and voila, you have your invention, well, you've just enabled them to go and copy what you're doing. That's certainly a horrible example, but if you enable them, then that's considered public disclosure. So what happens if you did do a public disclosure by mistake, which does happen? We oftentimes will get who's calling us less than 24 hours before they're going to give a talk or something, and they just got busy and they forgot, and we got to act quickly and so forth. But if you do generate a public disclosure, it's not the end of the world. You do lose international rights immediately, but you have up to a year from that date to file with the U.S. Patent Office for protection in the U.S. Now, if during your public disclosure somebody heard you talk and they ran to the U.S. Patent Office and they beat you to it, despite being a first-to-file country, if you heard about that individual doing this, you could go to the patent office and say, oh, this actually isn't their invention. I made a public disclosure, so therefore this is not novel. So this application or this issued patent is not patent eligible. So speaking of novelty, and what I started mentioning a moment ago is to be patent eligible, and this is specifically within patents, not copyright, trademark, and trade secret. You need to meet 3 general requirements. You need to have utility, so that's why we look at usefulness. It needs to be novel, so essentially novel means nobody's ever talked about this. You can search the literature from today to the end of days, and you'll never find anybody else talking about this. There's no other patents that are out there. There's no YouTube video of somebody in a remote part of the world doing this. You were the first one to think about this invention. And then it needs to be non-obvious to one of ordinary skill in the art. This is usually the rejection that will come back from the U.S. Patent Office. It's somewhat subjective, and as a result can lead to back and forth with the U.S. Patent Office until you can convince them that whatever you're filing on is not obvious to one of ordinary skill in the art. A great way to prove that is to actually find teachings in the literature that speak to the opposite of what you're doing and saying that this is the way that you do that, not this way, and you do that experiment, you get certain results. Whatever you're trying to accomplish doesn't work. You do it your way and it works. So if this person in the literature is saying this is the way to do it, and it's not the way to do it, I'm doing it this way, and this way works better, well, all of a sudden then it wouldn't be obvious, because if it was obvious, you would do it the way the person in the literature said to do it, rather than just making more trouble for yourself. And then you can also write declarations as experts in the area. Oftentimes we have world-renowned leaders here at the university, and sometimes they do know more than the person evaluating the application. So you can just write a statement, kind of back it with claims, and send it off to the U.S. Patent Office, and a different committee there will review that. But overall, those are the 3 things that you need to meet to be patent eligible. Patent law is always changing, so there are other situations. So like with software in 2014, there was the Alice Supreme Court decision, which invalidated a lot of patents. Because back in the early days of software, I guess there was a little bit of lack of knowledge around the breadth of where software can go. And nowadays, as a result of that decision, any software patent that to be eligible, it needs the way that you draft it and you write it up, it needs to have some affiliation with an actual device. Like, so it has to be a software application that would run on a cell phone or on an iPod or on a little earpiece or something like that, but it needs to be tied to a physical device. And it can even be just a chip that's in the phone. It doesn't need to be a whole like user interface and so forth. It just needs to have some hardware backing it while still meeting the three requirements on the side. Yeah.
So as far as the novelty aspect goes, how would it work if you were using a process for something that already exists for one thing, but you're like applying it in a new way or something? Is that still considered a novel idea, or because like you could use something obvious, but like apply it in a way that no one's ever done it before?
Mm-hmm. That would need patent eligibility overall in broad scope, but usually a patent attorney is going to look to get the most broad claims that you can get. So when you look up a patent application, there's claims, and it's really only what's written in that claims that gives you protection. So usually in a case like that, your claims will just be a little bit more narrow, or specifically what you're doing, rather than just saying, I mean, you could have somebody here creating a great like hydrogel sensor, and 10 years ago, before hydrogels were somewhat known in the marketplace, they tried to patent the full breadth and say medical devices and cars and cell phones and so forth. It would probably get rejected, and they say, well, what are you actually doing? And there's ways to capture all those different applications along the patent process, but in general, if you found something that's being done somewhere else, and again, it meets the novelty requirement, and overall there's going to be different strategies to overcoming the obviousness, because it could come back as an argument. You could essentially patent that. So a good way to know if something is novel and has been talked about is Google Patents, and Google Scholar is a great way to go. You can actually jump on the U.S. Patent Office website. At first it looks a little bit daunting, but once you kind of give it a little bit of time, it's actually a pretty useful tool. You usually just select keywords to input into the search bar. It can be that a lot of references will come up, and it takes some time. And that's usually why folks will pay law firms to do it, but law firms can cost anywhere from $700 probably up to $3,000 if you're in the Bay Area or somewhere more expensive. So sometimes, especially in the early days, a lot of people will just focus on doing the searches themselves and figuring out really quickly if they have something novel or not. So you don't have to do a prior art search, but it's really helpful, especially because patents are very expensive, and it can save you a lot of money up front when you already know what's out there and you're drafting your application to kind of navigate those waters. And then also something that we actually don't do at our office because they can cost between $10,000 to $15,000 per case, but we do recommend people who take licenses to our technologies to run a freedom to operate, because you can get patents issued to you, but it doesn't mean that you're not infringing on somebody else that's has an issued patent already. So companies will do a freedom to operate to just make sure that they're not going to get hit with a lawsuit at some point down the road. So diving a little bit deeper into the patent world, we talked about public disclosures. Real quickly on deadlines. So, I mean, the reason you see these numbers is when number 2 represents we ideally would have 2 months before any public disclosure that an inventor here at the university would come to us, and we would begin our process in order to just not be rushed about our evaluation. But as soon as you file the provisional, as soon as you're the first to file with the U.S. Patent Office, it starts a 12-month clock. You have your placeholder with the U.S. Patent Office. In theory, you can go out and talk to anybody with full confidence, not under confidentiality, I would be happy to talk to you guys why that's not always the case, and you still, in your first 12 months, want to be careful, but you'll have to follow up with me outside of here because we're somewhat limited on time. But as soon as you have it, you have 12 months, and the reason the U.S. Patent Office gives you that is in order for you to feel confident that you have your placeholder, and then you can work on the technology and get it to that exact specification that you want in order to file a valuable patent application with them. At the 12-month mark, which is the conversion date, you need to decide if you want to do a U.S. only or a PCT. PCT is represents international filing. I think it's the Patent Corporation Treaty, which almost all countries are a part of. And you don't, when you decide, if you decide to file internationally, you don't need to decide which countries. You just need to, you can delay that to later down the road, or you can just say, yeah, we know that we're going into China, into India, into Australia, we're just going to file and get this process going. But if you just say, yeah, we're going to file internationally one day, from that 12-month mark, you'll actually have 18 months until the 30th month mark from that initial filing to wait until you have to decide which countries to go into. One reason this is a good thing is you can actually say, I'm going to file in the U.S. and I want to file internationally one day, so you do what they call a U.S. PCT, and then that will get the process started in the United States, what is usually the most valuable market. And then within 6 months of you doing that, you'll probably hear back from the U.S. Patent Office. And that will give you kind of an idea of what challenges your patent will face. And potentially you will say, we got to abandon this whole thing because there's no way we're going to overcome that reference that we didn't catch when we did our prior art search. And at the same time, it can just help you prepare your arguments for later down the road. And also advise you time as an entrepreneur to go and raise money, pay for these things. The average U.S. patent, Google will tell you it's about $16,000. I've seen them go up to $30,000. Overall, roughly, you could estimate that every single country will be that amount. When you're in countries like Japan and China and so forth, you pay translation fees, and your attorneys here work with firms over there, and it gets really expensive really quickly. I have 2 applications that are licensed to one company, and they filed in 6 countries. And before we even received any communication back from the U.S. Patent Office, it was $72,000. So again, earlier when I was talking about why I don't necessarily think it's always wise to go after a patent, it can bring a tremendous amount of value, and in many industries you have to have it, such as therapeutics and diagnostics. There's many contemplations on that ROI. Is this the right one to file a patent on? Should we maybe wait 5 years, and so forth. And at the same time, I've had applications that have taken 9 years to get to issuance. Essentially, your 20 years start from that first filing date. If it does take that long, you can request from the U.S. Patent Office to kind of give you a few extra years, and I guess it gets calculated somehow, and you can build some years on top of it, but essentially, you'll have 20 years of protection. And then, somewhat mentioned earlier, infringement and enforcement. There's no patent police out there. The burden of stopping somebody is on you, and the way you stop somebody is through the legal system. Rule of thumb is it's anywhere from $1 to $3 million to stop somebody from infringing on your patent. So many times they'll settle outside of court. And then in addition, if you knowingly are aware of somebody infringing on your patent and you don't make them aware that they are, and you don't send them cease and desist letters and go through this lengthy process, essentially they could go back to the U.S. Patent Office a few years later and say, oh, the company A knew that we were infringing on their patent. It basically means it's an inactive patent. We want you to USPTO to validate it. And basically, as a patent owner, if you're not stopping people, you're essentially giving them a free pass on practicing your IP, and then the U.S. Patent Office will tell them, yes, you can keep doing it, and they can't come back and haunt you. All of this costs a lot of money, so it's not that simple, but that essentially is the obligation and responsibility on the patent holder. And especially if you're an early company and you're thinking about a PCT and filing in all of these international countries, well, are you going to go to China and go through this process? Are you going to go like all over the world and stop people? You don't have to right out the gates to like make sure nobody is infringing, but as soon as you caught word that that's happening, like if you were Snapchat or Snap and you had the glasses that they recently came out with, and you start finding out that there's people in China where you have international protection on making those same glasses and selling them, essentially over a certain period of time, your patent in China would be invalidated if you didn't go after them. So early stage startups, cash is always a big issue. So there's
depending on whether you knew that they're doing it?
Yeah, if you know. And then the counter, the opposite of that is that if that company came to the Chinese patent office or the U.S. patent office and said, oh, they knew that we were infringing on their patent, the burden would then be on that person to prove that you knew. The burden of proof is always on the person making the claim. So if you sent them a cease and desist letter and you ran out of money and you waited 5 years, somebody would have to prove that you knew. I don't know to say, like, are they going to have you come out to China and sit on a jury and testify that you didn't know and so forth, but, and I think it usually doesn't even go down that route unless you're an Apple or Samsung or something like that, but overall, if somebody could prove that you knew, you know what happened. And another example of this is actually in the real estate business, and every state's different, but if somebody's squatting on your house, it's like a beach vacation home, and you know it, and you don't go through the process to call the sheriff and pick them out and so forth, there's a certain statute that if they're openly living there for a certain amount of time, they'll actually own your house. So you can find interesting videos on YouTube that when the recession hit and the bank went under, and then the bank's acquirer went under like 6 months later, and there was no actual entity to hold the lien on the house, and big banks weren't buying all these like horrible credit rating loans. There's people around the country that just stayed living in their house and they ultimately got ownership of it for free. Yeah, I mean, I think Maryland, where I grew up, was like 4 or 7 years. Either Maryland or Utah's 4 or 7, and vice versa. So, and I would assume that in some other industries and so forth, a principle like that is somewhat known as well. So why I don't always think patents are great is because sometimes the ideas aren't that great. Personally, I wouldn't jump out of a plane with that thing on my head. On the top left, you have the anti-eating face mask. I think that'd be kind of weird to walk around with. Process for capturing an animal's emissions seems a little bit dangerous, especially when you're next to a bath with a flame going in it, which I would assume has to come from gas or something. I don't know what I put in there. But in general, you can find some pretty funny patents online, and then I would just assume that parachute probably wouldn't hold. So if you pulled up that patent, you read the claims, and then you went and built it, it doesn't mean that it's at work. Which is another reason to try and delay the publications and the public disclosures as long as you can. Yes, there's somewhat of a chance that somebody else could swoop in and beat you for that innovation, but overall, oftentimes people get issued patents because they started too early in the process, they never built the prototype to the final specification, and when they finally got to that specification, and you usually learn that from speaking to your customers, and you guys are doing the business model canvas example, and we'll touch on that in a moment, but these are some examples to say literally why it's not worth to file for patent applications. I mean, some of these were done a long time ago, probably the cow ones maybe like maybe within the dates on it. So from 2003 and 1980, and these ones on the right are super old, but the one from 2003 is certainly $30,000, and get a whole farm with thousands of cows and these things loaded on the back. I wouldn't want to be the farmer on that specific plot of land in case something went wrong. It seems like a massive explosion. And then this is a documentary that came out from Wired Magazine. It's 3 parts. You can find it on YouTube. Very easy. Found it fascinating. I encourage you guys to see it if you're kind of a maker type. You like tinkering with devices. And I let 5 minutes play, where they're basically touching on the culture in China around intellectual property and why they don't necessarily, just the Chinese culture has a different view of it. And it's, I think the total documentary is only an hour long. So if this is an area that you guys are really interested in and you're working on some projects, I would certainly encourage, especially in the hardware space, which is tends to be kind of expensive, is a great documentary that came out. Oh, sorry. One second. Which link again?
So when it was playing,
Uh-huh.
over and over again.
Thank you.
In the West, there's an idea that I can have a company that produces nothing, has a ton of patents, but produces money by suing everyone for rights to those patents. You don't even have inventors, you have lawyers making money off of buying intellectual property and trading. That's weird. Like, it's kind of weird that you produce nothing but make a lot of money. The idea that you can take an idea in a world that's this big and say exactly one person owns the right to it globally. Like Apple has the right to the phone with rounded rectangles. They're the only people who can produce that. Really? Like, seriously? This is the world we're going to live in? Like, we just give people monopolies through the IP system for 20 years for stupid ideas because they were first to file. That made sense back in the day when there were fewer people, less innovators, a less connected world. Now we have like this network of people where like we're empowered to do our things and we can almost trade our creativity. And China's ecosystem is this network ecosystem of an idea for an idea. Like let's trade. Now you realize your place in ecosystems, I need other people around me. You can't be a dick to like all the other guys around you just because you have a patent monopoly on this thing. Someday you're going to be on the bottom side of the chain and you're going to need other people's help. And so you build networks of collaborations with people by sharing in this open source philosophy.
We have our first copycat. Let's not copycat, let's say it's a fan. The guy, a reverse engineer from the video of scene, produced a plan of the of 3D models you can download and print your own. What we want to do is we want to print it.
All the hardware companies that come in here, of course, we encourage them to patent all of their technology. But we don't expect them to fight anybody who's copying them. We expect them to be moving much faster than anybody who's copying them, coming up with the next thing the whole time and building a brand. And then eventually those patents may get used when they get into a patent trade-off. That's the use of the patents, not to stop people copying you. The way to stop people copying you is to make whatever they're copying irrelevant because you've come up with something much better.
A huge barrier, I think, to small companies in the United States is like the patent system and the copyrights, and just like left and right, there's legal challenges, and you spend a huge portion of your money on lawyers and IP filings and all that sort of stuff. It's a drag. It really is. If you want to be making stuff, you want to be actually working with people and sharing ideas openly and getting things going.
I'm actually I like to invent things. This one is called a solar wave. You control speed by the needing. This is my latest invention. It's called hover tracks.
Yeah, the hoverboard story is a very interesting example of somebody in America who came up with the intellectual property and then spent a long time fighting manufacturers who were actually creating something which was similar. That's a great example of a case where I would have encouraged somebody not to start like fighting around IP protection. It's better just to build a brand around a really great product. Make sure you've got, the leading product in the area.
This is really the first time we have a technology product which become widely popular, which become a cultural icon, but we don't have a name for it. It just emerged. More people come in, evolve it, tweak it, evolve it, tweak it. Eventually it will get to a form which will go viral. This is kind of pointing to the future of how things could happen.
So in Quasium Day, you still find Shanghai, there are basically fakes, there are reproductions of established brands. I give you an example because this is a contemporary sort of Shanghai smartwatch running on an Android system. The reproductions were really the items that were sought after by people who could not afford the real thing.
My understanding is that the early Shanzai were people who worked for the...
All right. So it might be kind of surprising that I work in intellectual property all day long. Our office will not work on anything unless there's some form of IP protection. And I'm here telling you guys this message that like a lot of people don't really believe the value in it. And again, I certainly want to emphasize that there's a lot of value in patents, and you should always be thinking about how to get that competitive advantage into your company. Especially, for example, if you're going to create a drug, an average drug costs $1 billion to get to market. You won't have any investors, no matter what, that will help you get through the regulatory process and so forth if you don't have intellectual property protection. Because if you get it through all that and you spent $1 billion, every other company can go and do the same thing because you have no way to stop them. At the same time, there's certain folks in the world that are somewhat copying the Apple Watch, and there's so go to Shang-Chi and get one right now. And then again, somewhat taking a few steps back, the patent is really only valuable to the extent of the claims that you get into it. So I haven't done a case study on that situation to see if Apple has a protection in China on the watch and to what degree and so forth. But if you invented something and it's great and you got certain claims and all I had to do is tweak some small dimension or something and it works 10% less good than your current invention, but it's still good enough for the average user, you're suddenly outside of that claim scope and you can do whatever you want, and the person that got the patent and the claims doesn't really have a lot of leverage. So there's a fine art to going about patents. It can be pretty expensive. There's reasons why to pursue it and why not to pursue it. And then there's certain considerations when you're going into these international markets and what you should do. And I really loved his comment, and I think it's what Apple did for years on end when Steve Jobs was running it and when the iPod first came out. I mean, MP3 players were around before the iPod. They didn't have a lot of storage, they didn't have a lot of battery life, they weren't that great and user-friendly. And Apple just killed it, and people just tried to copy, and they were always one step ahead. And suddenly they came out with a smartphone, and BlackBerry was dominating. It was a $50 billion company or something like that. BlackBerry today is a $5 billion company. Nokia got bought by Microsoft and shut down essentially, and I think they've somewhat spun out as a new hardware kind of company. But in general, if you're working on something today, you should kind of thinking about that timing and how it all fits into the process and what that next generation patent is super valuable. Any questions or thoughts? It'll be interesting to see if Rajesh listens to this video or this recording and get his opinion. But he also, I work with Rajesh directly. I manage his portfolio for our office, and at times we're like, well, is this better as a trade secret? And it saves costs. And then sometimes other applications like, well, maybe we just kind of put that component out into the world because it's just too costly and we just don't know where we're going to get out of it. If you guys love startups and technology, like me, I would highly encourage looking up CB Insights. They have over 300,000 users, registered folks on their newsletter. They come out with top-of-the-line data and facts about the startup world and this remarkable articles, I think, all on a weekly basis. And They actually started as funded by the government through the NSF in 2008 and found, I don't really know specifically what they were doing right out the gates, but they are renowned within the technology and startup world for the data and the insights that they have and just contacts everywhere. And then in the last couple months, there was a whole article in the magazine about startups and so forth. And I found both of these to be very interesting, in particular because I personally have seen nowhere that really directly talks about IP. Here, I think technology, you could basically capture it in there, but teams are in the top 3. If I see the Insights interviewees, which again, if you see the small print, it's post-mortem from 101 startups that have failed. And as somebody who reads up on this stuff a lot, you'll see this insight. I mean, some of them will move up and down a bit, but overall, you'll see a lot of similarities that usually the team and the market are at the top. Technologies and idea aren't really everything within it. There's been Friendster, but for some reason Facebook took off. There's been, MySpace has pivoted numerous times. There's an electric car company called Better Place that really started when Tesla was starting, and they had $700 million of funding, and they're bankrupt today. So the electric vehicle market's catching on, I'm sure they had great management and so forth, and a whole variety of these different factors probably came into play, but I thought this was really interesting, not only because they don't mention IP, but just to see what investors look at and what companies look at as far as being the reason why they succeeded and or they failed. So real quick, the business model canvas, we actually use this in our office quite often for any team that comes through and wants to take a technology and build a startup out of it and leave the university. They are required to go through our Lean Canvas cohort program. You'll hear different variations of this name out there. UStar actually has one which has a different twist on the name. I don't remember at the moment. CMI, the Center for Medical Innovation, does one. And this is a tool used by the NSF in order to determine which research projects they should continue funding. I think it's between your first application and your second one, if you're coming back for more money. The point is to certainly generate research, but at the same time, they want to make sure that there's actual value getting to people's hands and that there's a somewhat of sustainable model that the money that the government's investing in the research will advance. And there's a reason why Professor Natan is having the guys kind of go through this exercise. And certainly I can answer some questions on the high low if you guys have any ideas, and it's an opportunity to talk about suppliers and vendors. But I'm just going to run through these last few slides real quick. Here at the university, tons and tons of support for entrepreneurs. Not just in classrooms like this, but across campus. The Sustainability Resource Center on the top right has the SCIF fund, where you can go to them and ask for money to make campus more sustainable. I think they'll give up to $30,000. It's been a little while since I've looked, and I know they've started different programs. Center for Medical Innovation, they're kind of the primary point of contact for bench to bedside medical device competition, if that's interesting to you. These two folks are investment arms that invest solely in university and student startups. I actually met with Contrary Capital is a decentralized network of student ambassadors on 50 campuses throughout the United States, and they just closed their first fund of $5 million, and they're making investments of $50,000 to $200,000 across 15 companies in the next 2 to 3 years. And there's 2 folks here on campus that you can go and talk to about funding for your company. And Campus Founders Fund got $500,000 from Kickstart, which is the most active seed fund investor in the Valley. And these folks only invest in student startups. I think they might be tapped out on money at the moment, but they're still active. They still have a website. I don't know the inner workings and what the plan is, but that started 2 years ago here on campus. And then Spark is another program, has some funding associated with it and some business discovery tools and support. I think it's a relatively new program. I'm not too familiar with it, but And then also bottom left, the Marriott, they can actually help you and teach you how to do patent searches on the U.S. Patent Office website and be a resource to you guys. And then the Natan Institute, tons and tons of opportunity. Get seated. I've been running for a number of years. You can get a few $1,000s. I've heard of students getting up to $12,000 in different tranches. And through that, you'll actually get experience pitching to a room of folks to make a case on why they should give you a little bit of seed funding so that you can validate the next step of your idea. Opportunity Quest, so the deadline's coming up at the end of this month. It's $5,000 for basically a 2-page write-up if they haven't changed their requirements as of late. The Opportunity Quest feeds into the Utah Entrepreneur Challenge, which is the largest discipline competition in the state. If you guys are not necessarily a venture type entrepreneur, but you love food, I worked in the restaurant business for 12 years, before going into the crazy idea of opening a restaurant, you can go into the Natan Center and test out your menu and so forth and give that a shot. I don't know if undergrads are in the get accepted to the Wasabi Venture Development program, but basically that's a semester or year-long program where they pair up students with faculty in order to help them, the faculty, commercialize their projects, and we actually work with Troy D'Ambrosio and those folks in getting them some opportunities from our office. And bench to bedside that I mentioned, the top row is kind of all services that are offered within the Natan Institute. So I highly encourage you guys to engage and go over there and walk around and talk to folks about your ideas and how they can help you. There's always events happening there. There's different people walking through the building. And I was here studying entrepreneurship in 2013, and that building was not around. And I've just been blown away by what they've been able to accomplish in the intention we've got to the university. So in my last 8 minutes, just having this, that was the end of the presentation. But I know you guys have this assignment, so I just wanted to put this up and potentially answer the questions on government and suppliers. Let's see if you guys have any questions about this or all that I just unloaded. There is a lot to entrepreneurship, and again, that's why don't be afraid to fail. Nobody gets it right their first time. Everybody gets it wrong. Elon Musk and SpaceX blew up 3 rockets and almost went bankrupt before they started landing rockets and recycling them to relaunch them, reducing space travel down to 10% of what it used to be. Always good to shoot for the stars. Maybe we won't all be the next Elon Musk, but everybody in every walk of life fails at some point, and you can learn from those experiences.
Just with all those resources that you said were available to us on campus, aside from just, I guess, reaching out to them, like to get involved, not from our end pitching an idea, but on their end, like hearing pitches and stuff, how would you suggest getting involved with it, like, aside from just reaching out to them? Is there anything else that you suggest?
So if you get seated event, you can just go to their event and sit in the room. It is open to anybody that wants to come in. The money actually is donated by Natan, I think. I think it'd be about $100,000 or $150,000 a year, and Zion's happy to keep replenishing that. Downtown at Impact Hub, there's 1 million cups. It's a network around the country where basically 2 to 3 companies will come in for 9 to 10 in the morning. The place that's running will offer coffee and bagels or something like that, and it's just entrepreneurs looking for feedback on their ideas. So you can go and listen to people pitch there and sign up to pitch your own idea to get feedback from folks. Don't be afraid to share your ideas. It's just, I know we talked about public disclosures and so forth, but you don't have to enable them and tell them how you're doing it. You can tell them, you can try and derive the value that they might get from your product. But if you are afraid that you're going to tell somebody your idea and they're going to run off and steal it from you, it's not advice, but probably 1% of the time that will ever happen. Ideas are truly a dime a dozen, and it's the execution. But again, if you are a leading researcher in cancer and you just developed and that you discovered the greatest marker for some certain disease, you probably don't want to tell that to your colleague at Stanford or UNLV or BYU or whatever and kind of give them that secret sauce. You'll want to go through the patent process, but it's great to get the ideas out there in front of people, figuring out what they care about and what's valuable to them so that you can tailor your product to them. Regarding suppliers, I would just call them.
How do you usually find them?
Well, here at the University, you have the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program. They sit over in MED. They're a resource actually for outside companies, but they can be, I'm sure if you knock on their door and the door is always open, they can give you some advice. UAMI, UAMII is Utah's Manufacturing Association Initiative something. It's a network of manufacturing here in Utah. And the internet's a great tool. Potentially some startup platforms like Angels List, which you'll find a lot of jobs on, but that I think is kind of a roundabout way to get in contact with them. But overall, they're service providers, so their names will be out there. So you can usually find it through searching online. But here specifically in Utah, in addition to UAMI, the World Trade Center, people usually think about New York City and so forth, but there's like 13 hubs or 7 hubs of the World Trade Center around the world, and they'll actually help local companies on the manufacturing front and expansion into international markets and helping with the financials and putting you in touch with the right manufacturers over there. I think you have to be at a certain stage in the company's development to get their services, but usually approaching the state as well is a good way to go about it. And because they're really motivated to kind of build the force here in Utah and the foundation of our economy through diversifying these things. And we do have a pretty big manufacturing community here, so yeah, some of those would be helpful. And then to get in touch with government, my friend in the back, probably a hard way to go. Governments have a long sales cycle and long turnarounds, and they're usually really busy and underfunded. So like if you found an SDIR and SDPR funding opportunity through one of the funding agencies, the best way to start is just, usually if there's solicitations for funding through the government, and there's from the DOE, the DOD, the NSF, the NIH, like it's pretty much endless. Wherever the solicitation is, there will be a program manager, so it's always really beneficial to pick up the phone and talk to them before you go about putting together the application. There's also entities that are a little bit different than those like big names. One is Oak Ridge National Laboratory. They're actually up in the northeast-ish Michigan area. And a couple of years ago, I just found some opportunities where they have a great vehicle testing center, and we had a battery technology that we wanted to do simulations on, and just coincidentally, they came out with this solicitation for small businesses. And I think just looking for the right agency, kind of looking on their website on what solicitations they have, because it's really endless. I might have mentioned earlier that I lived in Israel for 15 years. I apologize for repeating myself if I didn't. I lived in Israel for 15 years, and there's actually a foundation called the Bird Foundation, and they give $1 million to 2 or 3 companies every year that bridge a partnership, research between the U.S. and Israel. You have to find matching. You have to have a 50% match to whatever they're putting in, but they're a non-U.S. Government agency. They're kind of this co-partnership between the 2 countries, and it is to just encourage technology and innovation. And there's a lot of different ways to go about it. Also, the SBA, the Small Business Administration or Association, has a lot of great resources for getting loans from government, and that's usually a first great stepping stone for something that's kind of going the governmental funding route. And then if it's if you're just trying to sell them something and you don't want funding from them, it can be extremely challenging. Is all I can say, I guess. We have, if you guys know, Vice President / faculty member Cynthia First. She does SSTDR technology, or she did 10 years ago, to detect faults in lines, electric lines and so forth. And I mean, they sell to industry. The company that has the license to this technology sells to industry now, but like planes are a great place where you can connect this and figure out where in the plane you have a break in some cable or something. And I worked with the company to try and get it for the National Guard here down south for them to do some pilot testing on helicopters and so forth. And it's a little bit challenging to break down those doors. If you're a good salesperson in business development, there's certain strategies to kind of find the right person on LinkedIn and commenting on their posts and start working different angles. And then also sometimes if you're really working on some cool stuff and it's valuable to them, emails and cold calling are usually the best way. And the last one is the overall thing that people will tell you is get out the building. The guy Steve Lane that pretty much all these campuses are built off of this startup manual. Always emphasizes like get out the building and just go talk to as many people as you can. And when you do this through the NSF, they actually require you to interview 100 people within 8 weeks. That might not sound like it's too challenging, but depending on your industry and your contacts and so forth, it's usually more than a full-time job to get it done. And we actually, when we have teams go through our program, we only require them between 30 and 60 in 7 weeks. And we only focus on the right side of the canvas alone. We keep the second side for a later point in time, but overall, yeah, it's getting out there. Anybody working on something cool? Okay. My friend in the middle, I forgot your name offhand, but I know we worked together with Taylor Spark. So you guys have a classmate here that's doing some of this stuff through our office, and I don't know how the projects are going with in my specific portfolio. I kind of hear about it every now and then, but I would just emphasize as somebody who did my undergrad here at the U and just very passionate about startups and entrepreneurship. Utah is a great place right now to do it. From the ecosystem that's out there in the valley for cost of living, cost of just talent, 3 major universities, ski resorts and just quality of life is really remarkable compared to going to the Bay Area or New York City or Boston and some of those hubs. So they bring a lot of value, and VCs are everywhere, and every Starbucks people are pitching to people, and it's a great way to raise funds. Utah has a lot to offer, and if you guys are interested in this stuff, again, as engineers and scientists, I'd encourage you to go over to the Natan Institute, get some exposure over there, collaborate with your peers, meet people. Academic experience will be what you make of it, and it's extremely valuable to network with folks, especially if you're here from Utah. A lot of people don't leave Utah. It's a great place to live. Came out here to the C1 for 1 season, and I've been here for 8 years, and I don't have plans to leave anytime soon. So take advantage of the resources. Never give up. Overall, they say that all job creation and so forth are going to come from entrepreneurs and startups. Big companies, despite maybe tax credits and so forth, aren't really hiring, and that doesn't necessarily lead to job creation at a certain point for these companies. So I encourage you guys to pursue the entrepreneur dream and give it a shot, and hopefully it'll solve some of the big problems. So if you have any questions, I'm going to leave my card here. I appreciate your time and attention and the questions. I'm always happy to answer questions. I might, after the fact, if you guys follow up with me, there was actually a student in this classroom, I think, from last year that followed up with me like 6 months ago, and I gave him some direction and pointed him in to some resources. But always happy to be of help, and don't hesitate to reach out. So, and maybe we'll work with you guys through some lab work that you guys are doing with faculty and so forth. So, thanks again. No problem.